be able to talk to everybody. I'm looking through the chat and I see a few people that I know and I would love to reconnect with sometime soon. Carla Bitter, oh my gosh. Ben Davis, what's up? But yeah, I just wanted to talk to you about this project that we did, which is part of the Pacific Standard Time initiative. There's so many of those going on here in Southern California. And just to get a sense, I mean, it seems like people are kind of joining in from all over the place here, not only LA, right? We got Chicago, and so that's really cool. So if you're not here in LA, I encourage you to come to LA in this next 4 month period, or if you are here, check it out. So the Pacific Standard Time is run by the Getty Foundation, and they gave out a whole bunch of cash in the form of grants to different institutions around Southern California. And the whole goal was for them, have people interact with each other, have the community interact with each other, and then create something special about that merges art and science. And so when we heard about that at JPL, we were like 100%, like, let us at that, because that's what we've been doing for a long time. I come from a group at JPL called Design Lab, and inside the Design Lab, there's a smaller group of people called the Studio, and the Studio works a lot on experience design, I think you could say. But in general, also, it's sort of like we look at two audiences. We look, inward to the inward culture of JPL and the idea of people, creating things. And so what we do with that is we call it, we listen to them and we give back something in the form of through our interpretation. And usually we help them try to like build their ideas so they can become like a mission. We call that helping people think through their thinking. And when we point our attention outside of JPL, we really kind of want to create experiences that get people in this curious state of mind, so that they can, and that doesn't mean teaching, by the way, because, actually one of the things I borrowed from a dear friend of mine, Paula Goodman, was this idea of sneaking up on learning, and like the idea of doing something special, doing something creative. That's almost like a doorway that invites people into a new world, that gets them ready to ask questions and makes them wonder what is possible. Those are the types of things that we try to do. And we like to do that in ways that are unexpected so that it catches people a little bit off guard. And that's sort of a background of the types of stuff we should do. But I want to jump right into this idea of blended worlds, because it was this incredible project. It's up right now at the Brand Library. And let me just jump right into that, because I want to make sure we save time for questions. So just seeing that, making sure. Josh, can you see my screen? Okay, cool. Yeah, so we call this project Blended Worlds, Experiments in Interplanetary Imagination. And one of the things that we were really trying to do is understand how a future life in space, when we imagine living across multiple worlds, how might that tell us something about how we could live a little bit better today? And one of the things that we were focusing on is this sort of general term or word called connectedness. And it was kind of funny because we started out this project, like 3.5 years ago, 4 years ago, when the grant proposal or the request for proposals came out. And we started thinking about this idea of connectedness. And, I guess it was right in the middle of COVID. So no big surprise that, interpersonal connectedness was a big deal, and we're trying to do more of that. Everybody's separated, and it really kind of highlighted that. And one of the things that became really interesting, though, was when I heard that connectedness it's like the feeling of belonging to something else, right? And that state where you feel like you are part of something bigger than yourself. And usually that happens in between people when you join groups, and that feeling is very comforting because you're no longer alone, you know? And it started this really sort of a big idea, but it all is based on NASA big ideas, because NASA has, these different big questions. And one of them is, are we alone? And when we were thinking about that question, are we alone? It brought up some pretty like sort of interesting tangents to that from a NASA perspective, because I think from a NASA perspective, a lot of times that question really is meant to kind of point to, is there other life that lives outside of the sort of the boundaries of Earth, right? And NASA, in fact, and JPL just launched a new mission, Europa Clipper mission, just a few weeks ago, that's going to be going to a moon of Jupiter, trying to figure that out. Could something else be living? But then the other way we were thinking about are we alone is psychologically, in the way that we develop culture and the structure of how we investigate things, and just the general nature of how we feel about how we exist within all of the rest of nature. That question of are we alone becomes something that was also really interesting, because in our research, we found out that, well, one of the biggest themes that came up in our research when we were exploring connectedness was this idea that we are nature. Of course we are, right? But somehow we've, really kind of developed a way to raise ourselves above the rest of everything else. And that comes with a lot of assumptions, and it comes with sort of a structure of how you deal with things. And one of the things that we learned through our research was really kind of thinking about, well, how could we engage and interact with other forms of nature in a way that allowed us to shift perspectives, understand the other side, and develop deeper relationships with it. And so, let me just give you an example of something. This is an analogy. And so our friends at Sawdust in London made this for us. It's a really kind of cool analogy, but it's basically a Venn diagram in some ways. We wanted to take it out of that. But if you think these two unlike things merge together or join together, what happens when that third and unique thing is created? And that's the place that we're calling blended worlds. And the reason why it's blended is because it contains both the ideas and thoughts and attitudes and beliefs of one side, and the same thing for the other, right? And this, of course, makes tons of sense when you're talking about people. What happens if you try to blend worlds with microbes? What happens when you try to blend worlds with entire planets or moons? What happens when you try to blend worlds with things that you simply don't understand, right? And so what this project became is a project about connectedness, but a project that was trying to seek new methods or imagine new ways that we could interact with the natural world that would allow for better relationships to form, and allow for other things. And we don't know, right? We don't know what can happen from that. And so when we started to go down this route, we started to realize that this was it's not a communication piece. It's not about telling people about what can happen if you do X and X and X. It was really it's a series of questions that we think could really help the future of science, that we think could really help the future of humanity, by allowing humans to interact with the unknown in ways that have yet to be imagined. And so that's why we're calling it experiments in interplanetary imagination. Is we feel like this area of interacting with things that you may not even think are living, like planets, or how do you talk to microbes? That where there's a sort of a lack of imagination in that area. And thinking if we can add to that imagination, it would be this huge benefit, hopefully, to other people who might be able to take that to the next level. And so we feel like this is the very beginning of a whole long series of research projects. And it started with just a huge amount of research from our team. And in fact, in the very beginning, we invited 18 people that we admire to come and talk to us about what they thought about connectedness, and about, what it means to them in their practice. And then we also interviewed a whole bunch of NASA scientists and JPL scientists and engineers, and asked them that same question, and asked them to also think about, how that idea of connectedness may apply to the future of science. And you know, we learned a lot from all of that stuff. And Josh was actually one of our advisors, so it was great. Thank you, Josh. Um, and so what it all led to is we had this whole huge series of ideas, you know, that came out of that, multiple brainstorms, multiple ideas. And then from that set of, you know, like of, you know, 200 sort of viable potential projects, that we thought that could, and when we say viable projects, that just interesting ways to imagine how a future of connectedness and a future of greater empathy could take shape, and what would that be like? That's what I mean. And I guess I should really say that, like, the sort of the more pointed kind of approach to what we were trying to do in this exhibit was really trying to create tools of empathy and tools of connectedness. And that's what we were thinking about then. And that sort of emerged from a Marshall McLuhan quote, you know, the mid-century theorist. He said, you know, you know, we shape our tools, and thereafter our tools shape us. And one of the things that we're really interested in is, like, if we can help to imagine a greater diversity of tools of connectedness that allow us to engage with the natural world, even the parts of the natural world that we don't know yet, the NASA natural world, which is all of the cosmos. And that means the majority of which we have yet to understand or discover. So if we can create greater, in, you know, a broader set of tools of connectedness, back to that quote, how might those tools change us? You know, could we help to like usher in a potential future where humans are sort of less alone in our own species, that we're able to interact with other species in sort of deeper and more meaningful ways. And so you know, in the exhibit, this is a picture from the wall of the exhibit, and everything, all of the ideas on that wall that you see with a piece of Kapton tape, which is you know, really this sort of a classic tape that engineers like to use when they're building spacecraft. That's all the things that you'll see in the exhibit. But we offered all of the other ideas to the public as well, just so that it could help them think and help them imagine about what a potential future of, you know, people using tools of connectedness and empathy could look like. And so um you know, here's sort of a piece of the wall with that tape on it, showing you know, the work of Bruce Mao, um, you know, and then a whole bunch of other ideas that are on there. Thinking about brain synchrony and how might you want to turn that off. You know, um, Nicole Stott, who was one of our advisors, had this really cool idea that she thought everybody should become a crewmate for Spaceship Earth, and sort of redefining what it means to be a citizen of Earth, and thinking about that from a planetary perspective, or even the idea of, like, speaking to animals and, like, what that could emerge to, um, or the ability to, you know, translate all the chemicals that are coming from trees, that they're talking to each other through the air, they're talking to each other through the ground. How might we be able to listen to them in different ways and potentially even speak to them? um, or even, like, imagining a future where we just have a much greater understanding of the things that are around us. You know, 101,027 words for rain. So I invite everybody. There's too much to show for, but, you know, please go to this exhibit. It's at the Brand Library and Art Center in Glendale, and it's, you know, it's a lot of fun. That list gives me makes me feel really good because there's so much in there. But it's also kind of interesting too, of how strange it is to even kind of, you know, when we were really kind of scratching our head thinking, like, well, what does it actually mean to do what we're talking about? And it kind of starts here to some extent. And so when we talk about communicating with other species, what NASA's looking for is probably the most likely form of life that scientists think they may find, is microbial life. And so there's a person, an astrobiologist at JPL, who went down in a submarine down to the bottom of the Mariana Trench and grabbed these rocks off the side of a big thermal vent, right? And those thermal vents are really interesting because they produce heat and they have different chemicals that are coming out. It's sort of like a little small volcano. And the scientific question is, well, can things live down there in a place where there's absolutely no sunlight whatsoever? And there's been a number of scientists who've studied that, and the answer is yes. They find it all over the place. You know, these types of microbes that they call extremophiles can live and you know, metabolize things, and they're sort of a living colony on these rocks. And so, how would we communicate with these things? Is it even, how do you, where do you even start? You know, if this is the type of life that NASA is imagining that we might encounter, is it even possible to do that? That got us into like started a path that was interesting. We worked with folks at JPL who were in the planetary protection area, and it opened up this sort of box that was really interesting. It's like, well, first of all, we have microbial life inside us already, you know, and the idea of who we are is kind of a funny thing, because we is, when I say that, like, I am David Delgado, I am a person who is a container for billions of different other things that are in me all the time, that actually affect my health, that affect different my behavior in some cases, that affect, you know, all kinds of things about me. And so, how much of me is me? And I'm starting to go in this direction because so much of what this project became was a series of important questions. And rather than going through all of the, you know, the details of the different projects that are in the exhibit, I wanted just to highlight just a few, so you get a sense of what we're trying to do. And then if any of you are in LA and you'd like to, or any of you like to come out anytime, this exhibit closes on January 4th. So I'd love to show you around in more detail. But just to get a sense of what we were doing is, you know, we invited some commissioned artists, some artists to join us, and we gave them a commission to, you know, work on this project together. But it wasn't only these folks, it was the all of us within the JPL studio as well, and design lab, who were working on this. And one of the things that, you know, out of our research, two things emerged. One is that we are nature, and then the other thing that was this really continuous sort of idea that popped up of the types of behavior that we're going to need to exhibit to create a better future is mutualism. And like, how do we create and work in a way that allows everybody to participate, everybody to do something special within a project? And so that is really the approach that we took for the project itself. So rather than, and it also kind of worked for sort of the general idea of who we were in this sort of grand scope of PST, PST meaning Pacific Standard Time, is we know that we're not the Getty. We know that we're not the Hammer Museum, or, you know, Museum of Contemporary Art. We're the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and we make robotic spacecraft, and that's the main thing we do. So we wanted to approach this in a different way. And we didn't want to take on sort of the world of fine arts and model that. But we wanted to model the research that and the types of projects that we are trying to bring into the world. And so this whole project was this massive co-creation. A variety of us, you know, chose different artists. We went through these big brainstorms together, and then really kind of thought together of who the best people would be to sort of bring some of these ideas to life. And I say it that way because I think it is important to recognize that, you know, a lot of other projects have like one curator, right? But I think that what we learned from this project was that a lot of different minds approaching a really difficult concept was better and more interesting. And that's what we did. And there was just a huge amount of people that from within JPL that the expertise that we had access to was incredible. And so from like a NASA perspective of like, why is this project happening at JPL? Is because one of the things that JPL really can offer to the world is expertise. And the other thing is data. And so both of those things together were really kind of the two main sort of wings you could think of as what we use to allow this project to take flight is well, this huge access to data, which belongs to the public, right? And expertise. And so we brought a whole bunch of these folks in and did a bunch of speed dating with a bunch of these people. And underneath the general idea of like, here's the general theme where we want to create tools of empathy and tools of connectedness to create deeper relationships with the natural world. What do you got? What are you interested in? And who might be the best person to work with? And out of that, a whole bunch of questions started to emerge. And one of the ones that was the most profound, and this person became a big influence on us, was this question here. You know, what happens when you can feel an entire planet inside you? And it's a really strange question, but we found out that somebody had already done that. And so I'm gonna play a little movie. If you can't hear anything, let me know and I'll try to figure that out. But this is a story about Moon Ribas. Moon Ribas is a dancer from Barcelona. She's a choreographer. She calls herself a cyborg artist. And what she was interested in doing was creating a new sense for herself. And the movie it's 3 minutes long and we'll go into detail of what that is. But the unexpected side effect of her creativity was that it created this deep and profound relationship between her and the planet Earth. And so I'm going to play this and I'll just be quiet while it plays.
I'm Moon Rivas and I created the seismic sense. In 2012, I co-developed a chip that converted Earth's seismic activity into vibration. I initially attached the chip to my body to permanently feel earthquakes. It moved me so much that a few months later, I decided to have it implanted. At the beginning, I had to get used to the feeling of these constant vibrations. I would get distracted while talking, or I would wake up in the middle of the night by a tremor. But little by little, I got used to it. It felt like I added a new beat in my body. I had two beats, my heartbeat and the earth beat, adding its own rhythm inside myself. It became a new sense, what I called the seismic sense. I started using my new sense artistically. The way of creating my art had changed. I started creating duets with Earth itself, making Earth the center of the creation, treating Earth as the choreographer and composer of my pieces. After 7 years sensing quakes, I decided to remove the implants. I wanted a radical change, and the most radical change it occurred to me was to take the implants out. Actually, I was more scared to take them out than to put them in. I thought that everything would change. And the most surprising thing is that nothing changed. When I took the implants out, I could still feel the vibrations inside my body. But this time, it wasn't the chip, it was my brain. After some months, this effect disappeared. I decided to take them out in Norway along with my fellow cyborg and childhood friend Neil Harbison. We were in Norway for an event, and I took the chance of being away from home to do it. It would be just me and my new experiment. We took the implants out in the hotel room. And near there, we found a place called Naiwar, and it felt like a sign, like the perfect place to leave my implant. I decided to leave the implants in the earth so they could become a cyborg organ again. Maybe this place could become the new place to bury cyborg organs. I just came back in Norway to remember where the implants are, to remember how everything happened, and to take some soil as a representation of this new ritual.
Pretty strange and wonderful, don't you think? it was really interesting because when Dan and I, Dan Goods, who's a good friend and collaborator on this project, when we were talking to Moon, um, we were asking her what happened to those chips, after she took them out. And she got really emotional and she said, well, I went and buried them. And that's how all of this started, is we were trying to figure out how we could, get Moon to do something for this exhibit. And so what we realized that it was the coolest story was actually her story. She is the art. She's integrating it into herself. And so we asked her to make that little movie for us. And then also she brought back into the gallery like a little vial of dirt from the gravesite or the burial site of her sense. And it's just such a strange thing but it really made us realize that she did create a tool of connectedness and a tool of empathy. And like one of the things that was really interesting about that is that it had such a profound emotional effect on her. And she started as an experiment without any really kind of understanding of what it would do. And what it did was something really special. Um, and I'm going to cook through some of these too, just to give you like a sense of some of the other things so we can leave time for questions. But, one of the other big questions that we have is, what happens if we, how do we bridge 140 million mile divide, and what happens when we do? This was a project by David Bowen. He's a sculptor. This is an example of how we could provide data to do something that turns into magic. And what you're seeing here is a field of grass that's being blown by the Martian wind. 129 blades of grass that have these little mechanical, um, you know, robotic things at the base that move based on the data collected by the Perseverance rover on Mars. And so what we did is we took the first 180 days of the landing of the rover, measuring the wind, and we're replaying that through this field. And now, how is this a tool of connectedness? Well, it's a tool of connectedness because it depends on who you are, right? So like if somebody is who's very familiar with atmospheres goes in there, it might be able to, or especially Mars atmospheres, they might learn something from that is like a nuance of the type of data that they're used to looking at in their Excel spreadsheets. And if you're like my mom who went in there, she was just fascinated by it because it allowed her to imagine the wind on Mars through the familiar lens of the movement of grass, and through merging the two atmospheres together, we're able to affect people in a variety of different ways. Here's another project: is how can sound help feel the proximity of exoplanets? This is a project by Shane Mirbeck, who is an incredible sound artist, the person that we worked on the Orbit Pavilion together. But he did something really special. And these are two projects in a row that are connected. So there's a sound project by Shane. They actually did it together. So it's Shane Mirbeck and Saskia Wilson Brown. And then there's a smell project by those two as well. But their story is that they're imagining they're in a spacecraft and they're traveling, far into the galaxy. And one room is looking back towards Earth and remembering all of the things that they left behind, and the other room is looking out into deep space and trying to look for a new home. And the way that they do that is through sound and smell. And so this is the room first that is done by Shane Mirbeck. He's using sound to explore all of the different known exoplanets that have been discovered so far. So he's taking data from the exoplanet archive of all the known exoplanets. And for those of you out there who don't know that word, it's the exoplanets just means a planet around another star, a different star, so not our sun. And there's this huge amount of planets that are out there. In fact, scientists think that there might be even more planets than there are stars. And so if you imagine that for a second, it's pretty crazy that there's a lot out there. And so what he did, which is pretty spectacular, is sort of turn our galaxy into a musical instrument. And the way he did that is by taking the distances between Earth and all of the different planets inside that data archive of exoplanets, and then use that to create a delay in the tone. So we create a whole variety of different tones, and the way in which they're played back through this experience is based on their distance. And so you'll get a sense of that when you listen to this. This is a video, I'm about to play it. You'll notice that some tones come in first, and that means that those planets are closer, and some tones come in last, and that means those planets are farther away. And if there's within that set of 16, there's an Earth-like planet or a habitable planet, and that's been deemed that so far, it'll show up inside the middle. And so this is really an audio experience, and it's really quite beautiful. And so I'm just going to let this play and won't speak for a few seconds. Oh, wait, can you hear that? Josh, are you getting any the
No,
audio?
we can't hear anything.
Oh, bummer. Volume up. Oh no. Oh, darn it. Well, I'll have to move on there. Just guarantee you it's beautiful. But that's the whole thing. So I'll switch to the next project too. And then this is Saskia's project. Sorry about that. You'll have to come and visit the Brand Library and Art Center. But that adjoining room is, how can we, this is Saskia's, let me see if I can even read it. Well, basically, how can we remember the things that we've left behind if it's only through smell? When the chemical nature of the smell is the only thing that you have left. And what I love about this is that there's a little bit of sorrow to it. Like you don't have any physical things left, but they have the chemical ingredients of what some of those things sounded like or smelled like. And so what they did is created this room with all of these hand-blown vessels, and inside them are these little white beads that are the same in every single one. And so you don't really know, there's no real visual difference between what one thing is and the other, except for the nameplates. And so what Saskia did is create this sort of memoryscape of things that are very familiar from Earth, and then move into things that are a little bit unfamiliar, but charted their path into the cosmos. And so Saskia worked with scientists from JPL to gather the data of what some of those things on the way out in their journey out into space might smell like. But just to give you a sense of some of the things that people would be really familiar with of memories of Earth. So gin and tonic on a Saturday night, oh my gosh, it smells so good. Campfire stories, seaside in the fog, and then it's starting to like get into spaceship, territory, clean spaceship, interstellar cloud, lightning on Saturn. And these are really provocative and interesting smells. And, this has been like a huge hit so far because it's nice to be able to experience things that that you really connect with and have a strong memory about. And then you get to things like lightning on Saturn, and you're like, you know, does it really smell like that? And, it's sort of vaguely familiar. Enceladus geyser. And so Saskia had that challenge of really trying to think about how to make it possible to smell and stay as true to the science as possible without doing anything poisonous or deadly. So I would consider this sort of in the area. All of this is in the realm of scientific imagination. And so, but she worked really closely with scientists to try to develop those smells. And that's like a, really, really provocative project. And then here's one more is that, this project is really special because it sort of reminds me about going back to the time where people started to realize that whales were speaking for the first time, right? And what if we could understand what they were saying? And fast forward to this year, there's sort of the alphabet for different types of whales have sort of been mapped out. I mean, we're getting really close. Well, what if the Earth could speak to us? What if we're just not using the right kind of imagination to think about how we can listen to it, right? And this is sort of like beta phase, pre-phase A test of how we might be able to allow Earth to speak to us. And it begins with this little box. And this is the creation of Liz De La Torre and Rafi Joe Wartanian. And Rafi is the poet laureate of Glendale. And what you do is you kind of go in there and you poke this button, and a little piece of paper comes out, and you tear it off, and you read it. And what they've figured out how to do is turn earth science data directly into poetry. And they don't use AI. It's really interesting. But what they do is create a series of word shells for, you know, nouns, verbs, adjectives, and create these tags so that it can tag to data and then create words.
Yeah,
And
it's
oops. But to give you a sense, I'm gonna let you listen to this. This actually comes from a PBS documentary that just came out about the development of this project, which I encourage you guys to go check it out. It's actually goes into pretty into depth about our process of creating all the things I'm talking about today, and you'll be able to see a lot more projects there. But this is Rafi, who's the poet laureate, reading the first poem for the first time and getting his reaction to that.
Yeah, it speaks data. Just have to do Python 3 and then it speaks .py. So try. It's beautiful. Wow. Oceans, my heart, bear this burden. Waves whisper tales of ruptured currents. Can you taste the bitters of my lament? It's hard to believe that I'm holding this piece of paper and all of the collaboration and meetings and brainstorming and refining the ideas and then actually getting the hardware to manifest this reality from an idea into an actual poem. You know, it's just a piece of paper with some ink on it, but the story behind that paper is so layered and there's so many people involved and so many conversations and relationships. So for me, this piece of paper really represents all of those things coming together. So there's a lot of weight and humanity in this paper.
Yeah, that is just such an incredible project. And, you know, the weirdest thing about that project is that the poems are so bizarre and they're so intriguing, and they make you really want to know about them and how they were created. And so what they're doing is they're looking at carbon dioxide levels, global temperature, and sea level rise. And they're mapping all of their word shells to those data sets that are coming directly from the NASA climate website. And you know, I'm gonna go through these pretty quickly, but here's another one. We all enjoy sunsets on Earth. Chrissy Stevens from our team at JPL is looking how sunsets may look like on other worlds. This is geomagnetic sunsets on K2-18b, and K2-18b is an exoplanet around a different kind of star that has this huge amount of, you know, activity, that, you know, energetic activity that is shooting out from the star and hitting the atmosphere of K2-18b. And so when the sun sets, you actually get auroras at the same time. And so she was really interested in looking at what, you know, sunsets might be like on other worlds. And what I really love about this project is that it's right on the edge of scientific imagination, right? So scientists are just beginning to be able to characterize atmospheres on other planets around other stars. It's just barely happening, right? So it's sort of like this idea of like hanging onto a ledge with like just your fingernails, right? But that's just enough to really spur the imagination, the scientific imagination of what could be, how could, you know, what types of gases are the atmospheres made out of? How would that affect the light coming from the type of star that it is? And so this category is just right on the edge of possibility of being plausible as far as some sort of general understanding of what the colors could be like. And then, you know, another thing to note about this project too, which is kind of interesting, is that Chrissy was able to make this project, Josh, through connecting with other folks through through this talk series, you know, so really, really great about that. And then this is the last one I'll talk about, then I want to open it up for questions, is another project from our team came from these two people, David Levine and Tom Gauthier. And they are really trying to like bring people together. So, you know, people being a part of nature, we are nature. How do you celebrate the act of discovery, the act of research? And so people at JPL are going out all over the world, you know, doing these Earth analog research testing, trying to figure out what may happen here on Earth so that they can compare that to what may happen in deep space somewhere. That's pretty general, but it happens all the time. So people are researching all over the place. David and Tom made this stamping system where they created these 3D stamps that could be pressed into the soil wherever you are, and you can take a photo of that, and it goes into a catalog. And what it does is unites this community of researchers together. And you know, even though these stamps are ephemeral, it's all ephemeral, right? Who knows how long that stamp will last in the ground? But you know, yet we still see footprints coming from early humans, you know, 20,000 years ago. So that's a really special one. I'll stop here. I really want to invite everybody to come to the Brand Library and Art Center where we have our exhibit. And I just wanted to open it up to questions before we run out of time.
All right, fantastic. There are a couple questions that already came in. The first one from Corey, he asked me to ask this. So helping people think through their thinking is such a good description of work I find I'm doing regularly as part of design projects, but rarely paid for. Does David or Josh have any advice on how to convince clients they need this valuable help, especially if they don't know they need it or actively don't want it? I'll let you answer it.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know the best success, I guess, right? So that's the best way. Like if, you know, I think part of the reasons why we've been asked to do it more often is because it leads to more fruitful results, you know? And one of the things that we're not afraid to say is like, we can be the dumb people in the room. You know, we can ask the dumb questions. We're surrounded by all these PhDs, but it's not about like, it's about different perspectives coming in. And a lot of what we're doing is just listening to what they say. And we say, oh, do you mean this? And they go, no, not that. We listen more and they say, oh, do you mean this? And they go, oh, kind of, but it's a little bit more. And so by the time we like put it through our filter as designers, artists, and creative people in general, and then give it back to them, it's aligned conceptually and scientifically, but it's coming at it in a totally different way. And then they can use those things and then that becomes a tool for them to help pitch their ideas, to help communicate with other people, to help get out of the super heavy details that they're in all the time. And, you know, so that's my answer. I hope people, you know, allow you to do that.
Great. Christopher had a question.
You talk about the edge of the scientific imagination. It's a wonderful phrase. I just was curious about how does it match up to the edge of the imagination of other disciplines?
Oh, that's really wonderful question. Yeah, I mean, super hard for me to give a precise answer on that one, of course. But I mean, you know, there's so many different ways to think about that. Like, you know, science fiction becomes science fact. I think Carla, didn't you do like a whole exhibit on that? You know, so. But I mean, another way to think about it is I heard this quote. I'm sort of embarrassed. I don't remember who said it, but it said everything is created twice, like once in your imagination and the second time in the real world. And so a big part of what we're trying to do with this is trying to create things in the imagination, sort of plant those seeds of imagination so that things might be more possible later. And I think that is the relationship is people are grabbing onto things that they know about or heard about or wonder about or are interested in, and then attaching it to the understandings that come through the rigors of science, things like that.
Isn't the reality our imagination as far as phenomenology, that we have the consciousness in our minds, not outside in reality?
Oh,
So,
I think so.
so
Yeah,
I have a Venn diagram on those disciplines. Can I send it to you and get your feedback?
I would absolutely love to talk to you about that. Yeah, one of my favorite subjects. But yeah, from what I understand, or what, not that I understand, from my perspective, it's that there's this whole sort of area of shared imagination, right? And some people have a greater knowledge of the full set than others. But from that shared imagination, you can draw upon those to tie it to something that may be new that you're creating, and it becomes something more than what you had originally intended.
I developed it for transdisciplinary collaboration so that opposing disciplines can relate in how they think. Like, the art, the science is the truth that reveals the myth, but art is the myth that reveals greater truths. So
Oh,
they
I love
become
that.
opposites at the same kind. I have that for each of the disciplines, to really kind of know how to work in another person's problem space, which I see you doing, which is amazing. I love it. But so I'd love to get your feedback.
Yeah, love it. Yeah, and I'm a learner in this area. So like anybody who has like different ways of thinking about this, I'm really eager to talk to you about the way what you're thinking about. So yeah, let's connect.
And I'd say, yeah, Chris, or if you want to send it to me, I can make the connection or whatever's easiest, or reach
All
out
right.
direct.
Yeah. No, I'd love to get your feedback, Josh. Yeah, it'd be awesome.
Oh, I would do it right now, but I'd be happy to. You know what? We have enough. There's no questions right here, so I'm gonna ask my own question.
Okay.
So David, you had all these different artists working on this problem set, and probably kind of all on sort of parallel work streams. Like, what were the patterns that emerged? Like, where did you see people picking up on similar themes?
Yeah, great. Definitely about life and water was like this huge one. Um, we worked with Net Lee, a really incredible and special person, who is an astrophysicist and a Native American artist. And she was fascinated about water being sort of like she wanted to celebrate water actually and give, sort of create an art piece that was about gratitude about water, but not just on Earth, about water and how it supports life and potentially creates life. So she made an audio visual piece that was recognizing Earth as sort of a womb, on its own, and then the human body as a womb, as sort of like we're sort of created in this liquid water state, and then Europa as this womb. And so that also came up in other projects too, with Victoria Modesta, who was really kind of focusing on interacting with microbes, but started to really kind of look at Europa as a womb of life too. And so this idea of life being created through water and how it relates to people was a really common theme. Another person who did that was Ikene Iojima, who was a part of this project. He's the director for the Center of Poetic Justice at MIT Media Lab, and he created a piece where, recognizing that we all basically have the same amount of water in our bodies. He wanted to create sort of the equalizing understanding of humanity. And you can you can hold hands with somebody and touch a pole, and it lights up the poles if you touch it. You become this conduit for the electricity. And so, yeah, water, life, and possibility was just this ongoing theme that resonated throughout the majority of the projects.
I love it. All right, I'm going to let Alexa ask the last question, and then after that question, then David, I would just sort of follow up with, besides coming to visit the exhibit, which I would love to facilitate. What else is it that this community can do, for you and your practice. But Alexa, I'll let you ask another question right between that.
Thanks. Totally love all these projects of my favorite artists, and very few have gotten this range of a group together to do something like this. So my question is, what was the biggest surprise that came out of this, that maybe something unexpected?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. Um, on like a conceptual level.
I mean, any way, is there a specific project that, oh, this went totally different than how we pictured, or we learned something that we didn't We learned something new about collaborating in this kind of way. You know, just
I
whatever.
think I think the biggest surprise is with it, like we were, thank you. Yeah, is that people were really receptive to it almost immediately, and because it starts out in one of these really weird kind of conversations and, interact talking with microbes and, implanting things into your body. But if if the whole real purpose is to really kind of understand how we can create common ground with other things you may not think that you share similarities with. Once you point those similarities out, everybody just loved it, And so that actually, I think, was a little bit of a surprise because we thought it might be perceived as a little too strange for some people. But it really reinforced the idea for us because once people saw a similarity between themselves and some other thing, then they became a really kind of more attracted to that project. And
That's really encouraging to hear.
yeah, yeah, I
Thank
know. That's why this project, it gave me a lot of hope about things because I really do feel like we are suffering from a lack of imagination in this area. And like if we can build this out, the general nature of our humanity is that we like things that we're sort of built from the DNA on up to recognize kinship, And like when we recognize that in something, it helps to form that relationship, and it's pretty gratifying. It's cool. I want to continue this for quite a while.
thank you.
David, that's fantastic. So is there anything that you want to sort of like wrap up the conversation with? Put it out there to the community.
Yeah, well, I mean, if anybody else is interested in this kind of stuff, I surely would love to talk more about that and to get your perspective on things. Um, it's kind of a funny thing because we did all this research and it was 3.5 years, and now, worked so hard to make the exhibit open, and then now I feel myself longing to have these conversations again, and to dive into the research once again and create. I mean, we came up with 175 ideas. Out of that, 17 were created. And so yeah, I guess my question is, if anybody wants to play in this sandbox in the future, please let me know because I certainly would love to do that.
Oh, I love it. Thanks so much, David. That's fantastic. I would love to. I mean, obviously, I want to come out there and check it out. Maybe I can do a field trip or something with this group.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for this. This is like, I mean, honestly, like not to get a weird, not to like anchor this in the other world. This was a wonderful thing for this week.
Oh, great. Yeah.
I love some hope and imagination and some looking forward to the future. Incredibly grateful for this presentation. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us. I really hope to see some of you all next week. David, I'll let you sign it off.
Yeah. Thank you everybody for coming. I really appreciate you taking the time. And I know there's a whole bunch of people on there. I haven't met you yet, but I would love to do that. And so please reach out to me through Josh, and to all of my friends. It's great to see you too. Carla, I miss you. It's been too long.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week. And I will hopefully see you again next week. Have a good.
All right. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye. Thanks again.